where the numbers do not suggest they're in a position to reopen. And this is all based on the metrics and the numbers. How many hospitalizations do you have? Are the cases going up? Are they going down? Do you have your testing in place? Do you have your tracing in place? And obviously, we have different rates of infection across the state, hence the variance in opening times. A big responsibility is now going to fall to local government to manage this situation. My advice to local governments are, in terms of priority, daily monitoring of numbers. Daily monitoring of numbers and daily monitoring of numbers are the first three priorities, right? Know the facts, know what you're dealing with, you know what activities you engaged, you know how you increase the level of activity. We're measuring the effect of that activity. Make sure you monitor it every morning. Make sure the businesses that open are in compliance with the guidelines that are opening. Make sure individuals comply. You know, you're going to say it's a reopening. People are going to say, hallelujah, run out of their house. They're going to want to get out. They're going to want to do things. Reopening, phased reopening does not mean the problem has gone away. It means we have controlled the problem because of what we did and because of our individual responsibility and individual actions. And that has to be maintained. And I would urge local governments to be diligent about the business compliance and about individual compliance. And then if you see a change in those numbers, react immediately. React immediately. If you allow this virus to get ahead of us, we will have a problem. So we'll have the data, react immediately. At the same time, the states need help from the federal government, and that's a topic that's being discussed now. Washington must act. It must be smart. It must be fast. New York State is a $61 billion hole. When you shut down the economy, you obviously create an economic hole for the state. Well, what does the state fund? The state funds local governments, funds schools, funds healthcare. If the state has no budget, then schools get cut, hospitals get cut, local governments get cut. If local governments get cut, then you cut police and firefighters. Why would you ever want to cut essential frontline personnel at this time? Makes no sense. Washington has already acted. They've done a lot of business incentives. Great. But we need our healthcare institutions, we need our schools, we need our police and firefighters funded. I spoke with President Trump this morning. We spoke again about the state funding issues. He heard me out. I've also asked him to expedite certain payments, and he's expediting a $3.9 billion payment to the MTA, which is a very large transportation agency in the state, which desperately needs funding because the ridership is way down. And the president cut red tape and actually sent the first installment today. So I'm grateful for that, and I thank him. The House, meantime, has proposed a bill. The bill does a lot of good. It funds state and local aid, $500 billion, to make up for those shortfalls. It funds testing. Everybody talks about testing, tracing. Those operations have to be put in place, and New York State will wind up hiring thousands of tracers. We need funding to do that. I understand it's our obligation. States are in charge, governors are in charge, but we need help with funding. And the House bill repeals the SALT tax change that was made in Washington about 3 years ago. And that tax change that they made cost New York State billions. The House bill repeals that change, which is a significant benefit to this state. And ironically, the states that were most hurt by SALT are the states that have the most pain from the COVID virus. So repealing SALT actually is, in my opinion, the best thing you can do to help the states that are now battling the COVID virus. In New York State, The SALT repeal increased our taxes $12 to $15 billion, just New York State. We now pay $12 to $15 billion more every year to the federal government, believe it or not. So that would be a major boost. But Washington has to act, no delay, no special interests getting priority or special treatment here. And when we're doing these corporate bailouts, make sure we don't make the mistake we made in 2008, where we gave corporations large bailouts and the corporations took the money and paid themselves with the money. I was Attorney General at the time. I brought cases against corporations that took the bailout and gave themselves all a pay raise. Why should the American taxpayers now bail out corporations unless they're going to rehire workers? I'm afraid you're going to see corporations that will not hire back the same number of employees. They're going to use this pandemic as a way to restructure or get lean. If a corporation is going to take government money, they should rehire the same number of workers they had before. I did an op-ed in the Washington Post to that effect. But I believe that should be a condition across the board. Any corporation that gets money from the government, from the people, should hire back the same number of workers. If you want to lay off workers, don't expect the taxpayer to subsidize you laying off workers. And if there's a moment in our modern history where we can get out of this partisan gridlock, hyper-political moment, now is the time. My position of funding for state governments is not a Democratic position. There's an organization called the National Governors Association. It's Democratic governors, it's Republican governors. The chairman is a Republican governor. I'm the vice chairman. And the NGA, National Governors Association, in a bipartisan way, is urging Washington to pass the relief for state and local government. So there's no red or blue here, right? It's red, white, and blue. Also, at the same time, we went through all this pain. People talk about reopening. I want to set the bar higher. It's not about just going back to where we were. Let's use this as a moment to grow and to get better. Let's learn from the pain that we went through. And I talk about reimagining New York. And let's use this as a moment to reimagine our education system, our telecommuting, our telemedicine, a better public transportation system, a better public health system, and take this experience and grow from it, right? Life will knock you on your rear end. That's true. But do you get up, and do you get up smarter? And that's the moment we're at. One of the lessons we learned, and I was speaking about it in the hearing today, we should never again be in the position where we don't have medical equipment, where we're facing a pandemic, we're facing a major public health issue, and we don't even have basic equipment for nurses and doctors. And so much of it came from China, and governors such as myself are trying to figure out who do we know in China to get masks for nurses in our hospitals. I mean, it was terrible what we went through. It's a matter of national security. And I want to make sure that we in New York are actually leading the way. Let us start manufacturing here in this country, in this state, masks and gowns and drugs and the ventilators and the tests we need. And let New York start, and we already have. But we should never again as a nation have to scramble the way we scrambled. We are now aggressively courting businesses, incentivizing businesses to build, to manufacture medical equipment here in this state. And the state will partner with corporations to do that. So if you want to start, grow your business, expand your business, manufacturing masks and gowns is not the most difficult situation technologically. The volume is the problem, the quantity. but we want to develop that here in this state. And then with this virus, we must remain vigilant because we're still learning. Facts are in many ways still continuing to change on us. And while we're learning, the virus is still learning also. We have a situation that is serious and concerning, which is these COVID-related illnesses in children. Department of Health is now looking at 110 cases of a COVID-related illness in children. It's similar to what they call Kawasaki disease or toxic shock-like syndrome. We've lost a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, and an 18-year-old girl to this disease. New York State and Department of Health are at the forefront nationally, if not internationally, in looking at this. And the Department of Health, good work of Dr. Zucker, they've had a number of telephone conferences, web conferences. 16 other states now see cases that they're investigating once Department of Health explained what they've been looking at. 6 European countries are now looking at the same situation, and I expect this is only going to grow. Parents should beware, and parents should be informed of this. The key is prolonged fever, and then you see on the chart the other symptoms that parents should look for. Also, it tends to present in children who were exposed to the COVID virus and actually now have the antibodies from the COVID virus or still test positive for the COVID virus. So if you have a child who has a fever, who you think may have been exposed to the COVID virus, a person who had the virus or you found out later came down with it, and you see these symptoms, then you should take action. New York State has published today online the first in the nation criteria for healthcare professionals to isolate, define, identify this syndrome, and test for it. But it is very important. Right now we have it affecting children from less than 1 year old, so infants to 21 years old. Okay, that's it. When you look at over the 100 cases, that's the span, which is obviously a very frightening development. There's more information on the website. Last point of personal opinion. I'm the governor of the state of New York, and I take that responsibility very seriously. I'm honored to be governor. I work at it 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. But in many ways, before being governor, I am a son, I'm a brother, I'm an uncle, and I'm a father. And as a parent, as a father, I just want to make sure I'm communicating, especially this last situation, to the people of the state and beyond. This virus has been ahead of us every step of the way. I can't tell you how many quote-unquote facts I was told that then changed, right? When the virus started, the virus was coming from China. Everybody was looking at China. Turns out the virus came from Europe, and nobody told us. When this first started, if you had the disease and recovered, you then had antibodies, and you were immune. My brother had the virus, recovered, so he had the antibodies. We were told, well, then you're immune from getting it again. And we had plans to have people who tested for the antibodies, they could go back to work because they were immune. And the facts changed. You know what? Maybe they're not immune, or maybe they're only a little immune, or they're partially immune. Then we were told children are not affected by the virus. That was the only good news, by the way, in the whole first evaluation. Children aren't affected. Okay, now maybe children are affected, and we just didn't know it. Okay, well, what do we know now? Well, we're studying 100 children from 1 to 21. Okay, Michaela, my daughter, is 22. Well, we only have people up until 21, so she's okay. Yeah, until we have someone who's 22, or 23, or 24. So the facts change. I have done my best to give people the information that I know. But I want you to have the same caution flag that I live with. The facts on this virus have changed, and I believe they will continue to change. So take this all with a grain of salt, and my basic point is, do not underestimate this virus. It has beaten us at every turn, and it has surprised us at every turn. Don't take it lightly. Don't underestimate it. I believe the facts will change as we go forward. The more we learn about the virus, the more the facts change, and the worse it gets. There has been no news since we started this where we were actually too cautious or too concerned. All the news has been bad as far as I'm concerned. So with all this information, with all government is doing, hearings in Washington, all this, you know who's going to protect you? You are. You know who's going to protect Michaela, 22 years old? Michaela being informed. Michaela understanding. I like to think with a little advice from a parent, which she discounts 99%, but maybe 1% of the advice communicates. Michaela's graduating from college this year. They closed the college. She said, you know, a lot of people are having parties and they're having graduation light events. Should I go? You know, 22, you can't tell them anything at 22. I couldn't tell them anything at 21, 20, 19. But I said, well, here's the facts. This is what we know. And is it worth the risk to do it? And Michaela's made all the right decisions. But every parent, every child, it's your job to understand and protect yourself. And I just urge caution. Because everything I say, I tell you everything I know. But I'm also telling you, there are things we don't know yet. And how do you protect yourself from those things? Just be cautious, be diligent. Wearing a mask, wearing gloves, staying away from gatherings. I know they're inconvenient. But God forbid, you know, just God forbid. I've talked to too many families who have lost people. I've talked to too many families who lost people who were not supposed to be lost to this virus, right? This was just about vulnerable people, senior citizens, comorbidities. Yeah, but then how do you lose a 40-year-old who had no symptom of anything, right? Children were not affected. Yeah, until children are affected. So, caution to everyone. And whatever I know, I will communicate. But again, it's about you, protecting you, and I heartily recommend caution and diligence. Questions?
Governor, the state website today posted what looks like guidelines, a breakdown of industries for phase one, and basically an agreement businesses have to fill out. Would you explain that process, speak to business owners across the reopened regions of the state about what they need to do?
Yeah, let me give you the general outlines. Melissa or Gareth or Dr. Zucker or Michaela can chime in. The phased reopening, phase one reopening for regions that hit certain numerical criteria. We talked about what regions are poised to hit that criteria tomorrow. And then with the phased reopening is construction jobs, manufacturing jobs, retail jobs by these guidelines. And the guidelines are posted, and the guidelines are quite specific: social distancing, curbside pickup, in-store pickup. If you're a manufacturing facility, 6 feet, PPE provide to employees, etc. Those guidelines are then enforced and monitored by the local governments. To the extent there's any question for a specific business that these guidelines don't exactly fit, how does this work? They can call the quote-unquote regional control group, mayor, county executive, their local county executive, because they're going to be in charge of the compliance. And we understand one size does not fit all, so depending on pound of business, it may have to be customized, and how do I interpret 6 feet? This is how my business works. It doesn't really fit 6 feet. All those one-off issues, if you will be handled locally. We just have statewide overall guidelines, and any particular tailoring question, that should be done with the local governments. You want to add anything?
No, that's correct. And we posted it, as you noted, last night. Today, we're doing our regional control meetings with the state to be able to answer questions of all the local leaders that will then get passed down to the businesses.
Is there a backside to the process? Does the state or a local control group have to approve these filled out agreements by the businesses?
This is the way that they demonstrate that they're adhering to the overall guidelines, and then it can be a check on the business afterwards. You said that this is the way you're going to maintain social distancing, that you're going to create a safe environment for your workers, and then if there's an issue on the back end, then you have the plan that they said that they were going to adhere to, and it's a way to hold them accountable.
In the Lake region, we've had about a week to prepare for reopening, and the phased approach is mostly for businesses and things like that. We're getting a lot of questions from people about social acceptability. Since we've demonstrated that we can be responsible and keep our infection rates down, is there any leeway from a social aspect? Can people go to their grandkids' house if they keep their distance? It seems like a lot of people are desperate for some social interaction.
Yeah, look, there was never a law on social interactions, right? How I interact with Michaela is my business. I could have gone, I passed Matilda's law. Matilda's named for my mother. I have not seen my mother since this started, except on video devices. I could have. That's up to me. You know, this is your relationship, it's your interaction, it's your family, it's your friend. You know, we have guidelines, we have best practices, we can tell you what we think is smart, but that's up to individuals. And that's why I say inform yourself. I suggest caution, again, because this virus has only gotten worse the more we know. But there's no law or regulation that tells you how to interact with your personal relationships. That's up to you. I hope you do it smartly, but that's up to you.
So how do you see Americans looking tomorrow when they wake up and they're in phase one?
The businesses that choose to open, big question is how many businesses, big question to me is how many businesses choose to open tomorrow. But you know, for those businesses that choose to open, this is how retail stores will work, curbside pickup or in-store pickup, and then you can get the details on that. Manufacturing companies that want to open, this is how their employees, the PPE their employees would have to get. This is how it would have to look in the workplace. No gathering, social distancing, etc. And then we watch the numbers tomorrow, and we see with that increase of activity, how did people behave, and what was the effect on the infection rate, and then we go day to day.
Governor, religious leaders, a lot of them I've talked to are feeling left out because they're not mentioned anywhere in your 4-phase plan. Now, while you didn't specifically close churches, I think a lot of them are looking for guidance. What can you offer to churches, temples, mosques as far as guidance for when they can start to reopen?
You know, it's less about being a church, a temple, or a mosque. It's more about a gathering, and that's going to be basically according to the guidance on large gatherings. But look, large gatherings have been where this first started. You know, we had the first quote-unquote hot spot, before they even called it a hot spot. We had the first big cluster in New Rochelle, in Westchester. There was no reason for it to be in New Rochelle and Westchester, suburban community. It was because one infected person went to a couple of events around a religious ceremony. But the last thing you want is 100, 200 people in close proximity. That is the last thing you want. That's why schools are such a challenge. How do you operate a school without a gathering? But that's the issue on the churches, temples, mosques. It has nothing to do with religion, it's the gathering.
In regards to the Madison County outbreak at Green Empire Farms, more than half of the workers have tested positive, some living floor to a hotel room. One worker just lost her husband to the virus, and the company isn't answering our questions. Are you getting answers, and what are you doing to protect the community and the workers?
Yeah. There are a number of outbreaks across the country in meat processing plants, right? So all these stories, this meat processing plant, this meat processing plant. Then we had an outbreak in an agricultural plant. Well, what was it about meat processing? It had nothing to do with meat processing. And by the way, it had nothing to do with agricultural processing. It was the fact that you had 1,000 employees in one plant. It is the gathering issue. What they call a super spreader. One person in a large gathering, any density, can infect dozens. That was New Rochelle and Westchester. Literally dozens in one event, in one gathering. That's what we learned in New Rochelle. That's what they learned again in the meat processing plants. That's what we just learned again in Madison County. So it is about the gatherings. Now, they have several hundred employees in one place. Yeah, one infected person, it can take off on you. That's why all the precautions. 4 people in one home, yeah. What we're seeing now with a lot of the new cases, they're coming from home spread, right? Close down businesses, close down schools, etc. So where is it now communicating and growing? In the home environment.
Madison County said that the facility wasn't able to continue construction of its housing for these workers, so they then put them in hotels. So the coronavirus displaced their project, therefore they had to live in hotels, kind of a full cycle of why the density was the way it was.
Well, if you have 4 people to a hotel room or 4 people to a home, it's going to be the same thing. It's, you have one infected person in the home, you see it go through the family, right?
Should something have been done differently, though, if they don't have places to stay, not put them in a hotel?
Well, people have to live somewhere, but it's not unusual to go through a family. My brother Chris had the virus. His wife got the virus, probably from Chris, though he denies it, but then his son got the virus. Why? Because they're all in the same place. Dr. Zucker, you want to add anything on that?
I think I would just add that we have been working with the county to address the housing arrangements and working with the employer.
Will you be holding them accountable if you find out the company hasn't been?
We are investigating everything, yes.
Governor, question for you about.
You know anything?
No, I was just going to add that this speaks to the whole reopening process, right? This is why it's so critically important that we're measuring on a daily basis the infection rate, the hospitalization rate, that we have proper testing, that we have proper contact tracing in place. Because if you look at the Madison County example, there's one instance and then there's an explosion of cases in one area, and you need to be able to test to find out whether or not those people are sick. You then need to be able to isolate them. You need to be able to contact trace to find out who else they interacted with, or else we go back to square one, and I think we can all agree no one wants to live through this again. So it just underscores the importance of doing this reopening process smartly, of every employer who's starting to reopen or is currently open, doing this in a way where social distancing is properly done, where we're making sure that everyone's wearing masks, where they're wearing gloves if that's possible, and that we do this smartly and we do it the right way.
Yeah, and one of the points to learn from Madison County, I think, it's too easy for people to say, in more rural communities, well, this is not our problem, right? This is a city problem. This is an urban problem. This is New York and Detroit, New York City, Detroit, it's Michigan, it's Chicago. No, it's Madison County, which is a rural county. You open a plant, you open a business, you go to a gathering, you have one person infected. One person infected, they can infect dozens in one afternoon. One afternoon. I don't care if you're a rural community, suburban community, urban community, nobody is immune. That's what Madison County says. That's what these meat processing plants in Middle America say. In rural communities, one person. You open a business tomorrow with 50 employees, you don't do it right, one person was infected, you can infect 30 of the 50 in one afternoon.
As businesses begin to reopen in phase 1, 2, whatever, is there a liability if there is an outbreak at those businesses, and should that be waived?
There's federal legislation that is now pending that's going to deal with this liability issue all across the board, but it is a big question. If I'm advising the business owners, I say make sure you take all the required guidance and you follow the guidance. And the guidance is quite specific. So I would urge that they all do that.
No, and part of the business reopening plan, as you're
Anything else you
noting,
want
is
to-
something that you have to turn in to attest to the fact that you are adhering to the guidelines. And so if businesses aren't doing that, to the governor's point, I think that they do that at their own peril.
Let's take one more. Someone who didn't ask a question, sir?
Surgery centers, eye doctors, dentists, what phase do they fall in? A lot of people are asking when they can go get their eye checked for maybe for a driver's license, toothache, whatever. Dentists, eye doctors, surgery centers, what phase do they fall under?
Just so you know, driver's licenses, et cetera, you can do transactions for the Department of Motor Vehicles on a website. For the in-person transactions at a Department of Motor Vehicles, which are basically license renewal where you need an eye test, something like that, those deadlines have all been suspended. So if your license expires or if your vehicle registration expires and you had to go into the DMV, no one is going to enforce those laws until you can go into the DMV. So we suspended that. The elective surgeries in many counties upstate have all restarted. The doctor's appointments, doctor's offices are operating, can operate with social distancing. Ambulatory services are open. You know, people who need medical attention or medical treatment should go get it, right?
Governor, on the state fair, you've already said what has to happen regionally for that kind of event to be held. But with the Syracuse Nationals coming before that at the fairgrounds, and then the state fair needing to be planned, what's your confidence level that the status of this virus will be in check for those events to be held?
Yeah, I am not going to guess, and all it would be a guess, and I'm not going to do that. This situation changes every 2 weeks. And that's why I want to do this caution, and I want people to hear me, because I don't want them to say, well, the governor said, which I did say. I said, we don't believe children are affected by this virus. I said that. I said that a number of times. And I'm talking to the best public health experts on the globe, and that's what they told me. And that's what I told people. And now that turns out not to be true. I'm very wary of that, right? And I take that responsibility very seriously. Because when I say it's a fact, I present it as a fact, and a fact is a fact. What's happening here are facts are changing. So to say, here's what I think is going to happen in 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, this is where I think we are going to be in September for schools, no, burn me once. I'm not going to guess. I'm not going to opine. We'll make the decisions when we have to make the decisions because for planning purposes, et cetera. But let's see what the facts are at the last minute that we have to make a decision.
What's the last minute for the Syracuse Nationals or State
Well,
Farm?
they have to tell me when their drop dead date is, that I would have to know by this date.
I'm under the impression for the Syracuse Nationals, that's tomorrow.
Well, they haven't communicated that to us, but, give me the drop dead date and I'll make a decision based on those facts at that time. And then if they change, they change. But I want to make sure we're using the best information we have, and we are in a situation where the information keeps changing. And look, there can be positive information also, right? There could be a medical breakthrough and they announce that they found a therapeutic model that actually treats the virus. So there can be good things that develop also. Just hasn't happened yet, but there could be.
One housekeeping question, 12:01 Friday morning or 12:01 Saturday morning is when a region can reopen?
12:01 Friday morning, the 15th, is when New York on pause expires.
Friday can be a day of business.
Yep.
There's a lot of confusion among professions that are in phase one about which phases they're in. Hairstylists, professions like that, they think they're phase two. Do you have an idea of when you might have a firm list of which professions are in which phase?
I hadn't heard that question, but we can do that.
Do you see hairstylists as phase two?
I don't know that I'm qualified to opine on that, unless you're saying I need a haircut really badly, and then we'll talk about it. But we'll get the information. We also will have daily calls with the Regional Control Council. The mayor and the county executive are here today. And a lot of this is going to be locally managed, so we'll be working with them. But, the state, one of the beauties of the state, we have 10 different regions. Each one is a little different, right? So each one of these situations has to be tailored to that community in that region. And that's why the county executives and the mayor are going to be so important in actually making it work in each region, and we'll be working together with them.
So it's possible that different professions could be in different
Well, no, a
phases.
hairstylist is going to be a hairstylist is going to be a hairstylist. I just don't know where a hairstylist falls. So I'm going to gracefully and artfully look to dodge your question on hairstylists until I can go back and get informed, and then I will have someone give you the answer. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you. Thank you.
In-person DMV, is that phase one or two?
I'm sorry?
In-person DMV services? Phase
That's
one?
not a phase. That's when we make a decision on which government agencies to open when. And we'll have a full list of the professions, hairstylists included, and what phases they're in.
When you cancel events like camps and playgrounds and dance lessons,
Same thing. They go by region. Camps go by regions.
so that's their decision?
To members of Congress, Republican members of Congress from New York calling for an investigation into the nursing home situation in New York?
Look, everybody, I would like to say that we are enlightened enough where this is going to be a period where we don't play gratuitous politics. But everybody makes their own decision. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. Good to see you guys. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you.